folks. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the Well-Tempered Clavier by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is a collection of keyboard music written in all 24 major and minor keys, published in 1722. These pieces are staples of piano pedagogy. My son played the famous Prelude in C major for his piano recital last year. There are probably 1,000 piano students working on the Well-Tempered Clavier somewhere in the world right now. And even if you're not a piano student, I mean, this music is very beautiful and very enjoyable, like most things that Bach wrote for music education purposes. And Bach did mean these pieces to be pedagogical. The title page on his original manuscript says that these were composed for the profit and use of musical youth desirous of learning, and especially for the pastime of those already skilled in this study. Even though Bach may have meant this music to be pedagogical, it's still very beautiful. But it's also mysterious because what does well-tempered mean? So well-tempered refers to the tuning system that Bach was using, but unfortunately no one knows what tuning system that might have been. There's a large family of tuning systems that are well-tempered, and unfortunately Bach never wrote down anywhere which one of them he was using, if indeed he was using any of them, or if he was using some sort of custom method or just kind of tuning by ear. There's just no documentation. We can make some educated guesses, but we really don't know. Tuning is one of these subjects that has historically just been super esoteric and impenetrable because the theory behind it is complicated and it's very difficult to investigate in practice. Tuning a keyboard instrument takes several hours if you're highly expert at it. You can't change the tuning of an organ without physically modifying it. You can't change the tuning of a guitar without moving all the frets around. It's easy to retune the strings, but that doesn't help you with the frets. Now, you can easily experiment with tuning on continuous pitch instruments like the violin or your voice, but dialing in exact frequency ratios on those instruments is very difficult and takes just an enormous amount of skill and practice. Until recently, if you were curious about tuning systems, you either had to have a very deep appetite for math or an enormous amount of free time or access to a very skilled piano tuner and unlimited money, and that does not describe too many of us. However, in the past couple of years, it's become possible to use your digital audio workstation and your digital synthesizers to explore alternative tunings quite easily, and that means that a person like me, who is not an expert on historical musicology, can nevertheless dig into historical tuning systems just for enjoyment. So that's what we're going to be doing here. I'm using a plugin called MTS ESP, which enables you to use any tuning system that you want on your synthesizers. I'm going to be talking about a few specific movements from the Well-Tempered Clavier. I'm going to play you some short excerpts of them now, as recorded by Glenn Gould from his famous recording in 1962. First, here's the C major prelude, the one that my kid plays. Here's the D sharp minor prelude. Here's the F sharp minor prelude. And here's the G sharp minor prelude. Historically, the basis for Western European tuning is called 5-limit just intonation. And what that means is you are constructing your intervals from frequency ratios built out of multiples of the numbers 2, 3, and 5. So 5 limit because 5 is the largest prime number you're using for your frequency ratios. For the purposes of this episode, we're going to say that the note C has a frequency of 1 hertz. It doesn't. Middle C has a frequency of 261.626 hertz. 261.626 is a difficult number to do math with in your head. So instead, we're just going to pretend that when you play C, you're hearing a frequency of 1 hertz. In 5-limit just intonation, you're multiplying and dividing 1 to get your other intervals. So for example, a fifth is a ratio of 3 halves. Here is C at 1 hertz. Here's G at 3 halves hertz. The note E is a ratio of 5 to 4, 5/4 hertz. There are a lot of different just intonation tuning systems out there. I am going to be using what's called Ptolemy's intent diatonic scale plus some chromatic notes. So we're going to have C at 1 hertz, C sharp at 16/15, D at 9/8, E flat at 6/5, E at 5/4, F at 4/3, F sharp at 45/32, G at 3 halves, A flat at 8/5, A at 5/3, B flat at 9/5, B at 15/8, and then we get to C an octave up at 2. The good thing about just intonation is that all these intervals are beautifully consonant. So here's a C major triad. That might actually sound a little bit odd to you. That E might sound a little flat because you are not used to hearing this chord played in tune. You're used to hearing it played out of tune. You're especially used to hearing that E being very sharp. However, just intonation has got some problems. Here's how an F sharp chord sounds. Yeah, that's not so good. The problem is that the notes in the F sharp chord are all in tune with C as much as they can possibly be, but they're not really in tune with each other. And in fact, we don't even have the note A sharp in our tuning collection. We've got the note B flat, and in just intonation, B flat and A sharp are very different notes. It turns out to just be very impractical to design a keyboard instrument in just intonation. First of all, you're going to need separate keys for C sharp and D flat, for D sharp and D flat, for F sharp and G flat, for G sharp and A flat, for A sharp and B flat. You're also going to need 2 different keys to play D. You're also going to need 2 different keys to play A. It's just a mess. It's really out of hand. As you move outside the key of C major, it's going to sound less good. And the further you get from C major, the worse everything is going to sound. So by the time you get out to F sharp major, ooh, it's pretty bad. We're going to be talking about 3 other historical tuning systems. First, here's quarter comma mean tone, which was very widespread in Europe for several hundred years. Next, we're going to be talking about Werkmeister 3. This is a temperament created by Andreas Werkmeister in 1681. We're going to be talking about Kernberger 3, which is Johann Kernberger's Well-Temperament as described in a letter to Johann Nikolaus Forkel in 1779. And finally, we're going to be talking about 12-tone equal temperament, which is the tuning system that you are used to hearing and that you probably have heard in 98% of all the music that you've ever listened to, at least if you grew up in a Western culture. We are going to listen to the beginning of the C major prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier in 5-limit just intonation. Okay, so that first little section is just an arpeggiated C major chord, and ooh, that sounds beautiful, although it might sound a bit odd to you if you're not used to hearing in tune thirds. The next little part is a D minor 7th chord arpeggiated, and that doesn't sound so good. And that's not just because you're not used to just intonation. The problem here is that the D and the A in this arpeggio are not in tune with each other. They're both in tune with C, but they're not in very good tune with each other. The next little section is an arpeggiated G7 chord. This also doesn't sound so hot. It's because the D and the F are not in tune with each other. Again, they're both in tune with C, but just not with each other. And then finally, this passage concludes with another arpeggiated C major chord. For comparison, here is the beginning of that prelude in 12-tone equal temperament the way you're used to hearing it. Oof, those thirds are so sharp. Once your ear is used to the in-tune thirds from just intonation, those 12-tone equal temperament thirds are just so awful. However, now D and A sound a lot better together. Nothing that you just heard in 12-tone equal temperament was perfectly in tune, but at least everything is out of tune in a more kind of acceptable way. Here's the basic challenge with your Western tuning systems. Let's say you're trying to figure out how you're going to tune your harpsichord or tune your piano, and you want as many notes to be in tune with each other as possible. Well, just intonation is going to be a problem. You're going to need 2 different Ds per octave, one to be in tune with some notes, one to be in tune with other notes. You're going to need 2 separate As. Ooh, if you want to play in keys with a lot of sharps and flats in them, you're going to need keys for E sharp, which is a different note than F. You're going to need F flat, which is a different note from E. You're going to need C flat, which is a different note from B. You're going to need B sharp, which is a different note from... Yeah, it gets to be very hairy very quickly. Really, all you want are 12 notes per octave at most, but then you got to make some compromises. If you're going to have one key that plays F sharp and G flat, then either one of those notes is going to be in tune and the other one is going to sound awful, or they're both going to have to be a little out of tune. And so basically the history of Western European tuning is the history of people trying to find acceptable compromises. I'm not going to get into the details of how all of these tuning systems work. If you look in the episode description, I've got a bunch of links. I would say that this reading is pretty dry unless you really like math, but I can at least give you some broad strokes. Quarter comma mean tone tries to have as many in tune thirds as possible. And in order to do that, it sacrifices the fifths. So all the fifths are a little bit out of tune. They're all a little bit flat. Quarter comma mean tone, like its parent tuning, just intonation, sounds really beautiful in C major and in nearby keys. And the further you get from C major, the worse it sounds. The well-temperaments are adjustments to quarter comma mean tone to try to get more of the intervals to be, if not in tune, at least bearably out of tune. The important difference between the well-temperaments and 12-tone equal temperament is that in 12-tone equal temperament, all the keys are identical. Everything is out of tune by the same amount. So the key of C major and the key of F sharp major sound exactly the same. They're both out of tune, but by exactly the same amount. And that means that they're more or less interchangeable. In Werkmeister and Kernberger's tunings, however, C and F sharp are not interchangeable. They're not tuned using the same ratios. C major is still going to sound a little better, a little more in tune, and F sharp major and other distant keys are still going to be edgier and more out of tune, just by an acceptable amount, hopefully. So we don't know which well-temperament Bach used, but we can be pretty sure that whichever one he used, it was not equal temperament. It was unequal, meaning all of the keys sounded a little bit different, and the more remote keys were darker and edgier. With all of that in mind, let's listen to the D sharp minor prelude. And D sharp minor is pretty far away from C major. First, let's listen to it in 5-limit just intonation. Okay, that's pretty terrible. And the reason it's so terrible is we don't even have D sharp in our collection of pitches. We have E flat. And in just intonation, E flat and D sharp are very different from each other. Not only that, but we also don't have A sharp. We have B flat. And B flat and A sharp are not at all interchangeable with each other. Tuning theorists definitely had their work cut out for them in trying to come up with a system that would sound at least acceptable in D sharp minor. Here's how it sounds in quarter comma mean tone. That is still pretty rough. Let's see how Werkmeister does. That's a little bit better. Still pretty gnarly, but not quite as gnarly. How about Kernberger? No, that sounds surprisingly okay, actually. Here it is in 12-tone equal temperament, how we're used to hearing it. Okay, so you can see the issue, right? 12-tone equal temperament sounds pretty okay, but that comes at the expense of like C major being pretty far out of tune. All right, now let's try the F sharp major prelude. Here it is in 5-limit just intonation. Yeah, that is also pretty rough. So we have F sharp in our tuning system. That's good. And we also have C sharp, but we don't have A sharp, and we need that for our major third. And instead we have B flat. And yeah, B flat in the key of F sharp, not too good. Let's hear how quarter comma mean tone sounds. Okay, pretty awful. How about Werkmeister? Slightly less awful. How about Kernberger? All right, this I think actually sounds pretty good. It's definitely edgy and unusual sounding, but I don't know, it's got a vibe. For comparison, here it is in 12-tone equal temperament. Let's do the same thing with the G sharp minor prelude. Here it is in 5 limit just. And once again, this is going to be pretty bad. Yeah, as predicted, like we don't even have G sharp in our gamut. We have A flat. We also don't have D sharp, which we would ideally want. So yeah, that's a problem. Quarter comma mean tone is also a mess. Werkmeister a little better. Kernberger, kind of okay, I think. Definitely murky, but at least bearable. And finally, 12-tone equal temperament. Now, here's the question. Why should you care? Why should a normal person who is not a historically informed performer of Baroque music be interested in any of this? I think it's interesting for a couple of different reasons. One is it's just nice to know what Bach was hearing when he wrote this music. Now, we don't know exactly what he was hearing, but probably he was hearing something along the lines of Werkmeister or Kernberger. Probably closer to Kernberger would be a reasonable guess. The important thing here is that in these unequal temperaments, the keys all sounded different. So C major would have been pure and consonant and sunny. F sharp major would have been a little anxiety producing. G sharp minor would be turgid and murky and kind of ominous, maybe a little threatening. And it seems likely that Bach was aware of these different qualities of the keys and wrote music specifically to suit them. And as I listen to MIDI versions of the Well-Tempered Clavier in the Well-Temperaments, they do seem to have a lot more kind of color and personality to them than they do in 12-tone equal temperament. Now, they sound fine in 12-tone equal temperament. They sound very, very beautiful, but you're definitely missing an expressive dimension of the music if you're listening to them in a tuning system in which all the keys sound exactly the same. Another reason why you should care about this is there's a certain amount of Western music theory that was codified at a time when the keys were all unequal, when F sharp and G flat were not the same note, when C sharp and D flat were not the same note, when an augmented fourth and a diminished fifth were two different intervals. It seems a little bit weird that music theory teachers are so insistent on this nomenclature in a world where F sharp and G flat are the same note, an augmented fourth and a diminished fifth are the same interval. But historically, they weren't. And it's much easier to understand these naming systems and these conventions about consonants and dissonance and voice leading in their original tuning contexts. Yeah, they make a lot more sense. Another reason why a normal person should care about this is the whole world does not use 12-tone equal temperament now. You're stuck with it if you play the piano or the guitar, But on the violin or the trumpet or the trombone or with your voice, you can tune however you want to. And my violinist friends and students tell me, yeah, they will definitely play F sharp and G flat a little bit differently, especially if they're not playing with a pianist. And they will definitely tune those thirds a lot flatter than in 12-tone equal temperaments so they sound better. Apparently, singers tend to aim for just intonation intervals when they're singing unaccompanied. Trained singers do it on purpose, but even untrained singers tend to do it unconsciously. Those just intonation intervals just sound better most of the time. So yeah, that's a reason to care about it. But also just intellectually on a symbolic level, I think it's important to know that this hegemony of 12-tone equal temperament that exists throughout the Western world has come at some costs. Yeah, like it is very convenient. It's very helpful for the building and designing and tuning of keyboard instruments and fretted instruments. But it sounds kind of bland and the thirds are too sharp and all the keys don't have distinct personalities anymore. It turns out that the world of tuning is much larger and richer and more complex than you would think if you were just using like a digital guitar tuner and a piano and synthesizers tuned in 12-tone equal temperament. There's just a lot more colors and shades out there, even within Western music. And then when you get outside of Western music, I mean, there's an enormous world of tuning that is vastly larger than what we're stuck with in 12-tone equal temperament. Even if you're just listening to the blues, right? A lot of the blues is sung and played outside of 12-tone equal temperament. I think it's important to know that this system, convenient and useful though it is not universal. It's not inevitable. It can be questioned because there are these other widespread, standardized things in our lives that maybe should be questioned, like economic systems, racial, gender, class systems, right? That like these sort of invisible, unstated kind of infrastructural defaults that we're all using are not inevitable. There are alternatives to them. They're worth questioning. And even if we agree on whatever system it is that we're using, we should know that it entails some compromises and that it comes with some costs. I think that even if you don't care about the history of Western European tuning at all, that is still an idea that is a very important one and definitely worth thinking about. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.